Hi, and welcome to the Red Tunic podcast, a podcast where I look to rediscover what makes gaming fun and enjoyable by having positive conversations with those related to the industry. My name is Link, and today I'm joined by Dylan Gedig, an indie developer that is currently working on the peggle-rogue-like game, Peglin. Hi, Dylan. How are you doing today?
I'm great, Lang. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no worries there. Thank you so much for making time within your schedule to talk with me. It's always I'm always happy when people are able to make the time to talk. So, before we get started, though, for those that might not be aware of who you are or what you're doing, would you mind just introducing yourself? Give us a little bit of information about who and what you are.
Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, so my name's Dylan. I've been in the industry for about 10 years now. I've been an indie developer on and off throughout that period of time. Released my first commercial game, I think 6 years ago as an indie. And it did okay. It was a finalist for like a Canadian Video Game Award and an award down at South by Southwest. But it didn't make enough money to like fund the next game, unfortunately. So I went and worked on some free to play titles for a while, for a few years. And while I was working on those, I was just kind of tinkering on games on the side, lots of game jams, lots of short little projects. And when the pandemic started, I really needed something to like really dig my heels into. And that's kind of when Peglin got started, which is our current, kind of our upcoming next commercial release.
Well, that's great to hear. And sorry about the previous game not hitting the heights that would have been able to keep you guys or keep you afloat for the next one. But still, that's great that the I don't know if accolades is the right word for it, but it's great to hear that you received those that recognition by by South by Southwest, and then the I always forget the Canadian things, but their setup. Um, I really should know them. I am Canadian.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It is what it is. It was a great learning experience, especially kind of knowing that the accolades don't put food on the table. You see those games at those stages, and you always kind of think like, that must have been enough to fund the next game and everything, and that's just not always the case.
Yeah, and me personally, I understand what you're saying there because I as a bystander or someone looking in would make those kind of assumptions because typically, that kind of attention and that kind of call out, so to say, or signal boost or what have you, usually I would assume would would lead to enough attention to keep you going like that. So it's unfortunate in that regard that you know that's not the reality. Um, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but I'm it's good to hear at least that you received some recognition and you have you have those under your in your pocket or under your belt or whatever the right analogy for that is. Sorry.
Yeah, oh, yeah, definitely, definitely.
So you did mention that you've been doing how long you've been working on doing indie games and some free to plays and such, but would you mind kind of elaborating or getting into how you got into developing and making games?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, so I've been like a video game fan my entire life. Like when I was a kid, we just always had a regular Nintendo and a Super Nintendo, and I was just like enchanted by these games. Um, but it's funny, like it just never struck me as something to try and get into until I was in like my like going to college, I guess. Like, graduated high school, still never really thought about how games were made. Went to college for business just because I didn't really know what else to do. And I kind of had this aspiration of getting into like some kind of marketing, like wanting to make like commercials and stuff. The like Skyrim commercial had come out like just pretty recently, and it was just seemed like such a neat like tell a story in 90 seconds to try and get people like hooked into this world, and it seemed like a really neat challenge. And I went to business school and I took some of the classes, and like accounting ground me right down. Like accounting is just all of the worst parts of programming and none of the good parts, in my opinion. Um, so from there, like I started kind of playing with programming itself, thinking like, I don't know, maybe I'll try and get into the games industry at this point. Like I'd kind of like explored a little bit more and kind of saw some of the other pathways. And so, I tried to actually like make a few small games, thinking that that would be a good way to, put a portfolio together, start to get into that scene. And that led to me dropping out of college and then going to university a couple of months later for computer science instead. And that's really where things started to cement for me, and I really found my place. Just having all that extra time in university to, join clubs and participate in some more of the like wider game development community. Like I had moved to a city that had a game dev community, and that's where everything kind of all really started to cement together.
So thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting that you didn't really have the aspirations. I don't mean that in a negative way. That you didn't really plan, sorry, to make games. It just sort of came into it as you went along. And I only say that because a lot of people, in general, myself included, I got into programming at a young age too with the idea of making video games and such. Didn't really pan out for numerous reasons. But you started in business school to try and go to marketing to do that side of things, which is really neat. However,
Yeah, it's a bit of an untraditional path for sure. Like you definitely hear a lot of these stories, especially from indie devs, where it's like, oh yeah, I found Game Maker when I was in grade 5, and I've been making games for 25 years now, and it's intimidating to hear that. Um, but that really is not always the case. People come to the industry from a lot of different angles.
yeah, exactly. And I follow like artists on Twitter and such, and I'll read a comment from someone. They're like, I have 30 years experience doing X, Y, and Z, and it's like you've been doing this longer. It's like they serve like the AZ Spectrum or whatever it is from the UK, and it's like you've been doing this longer than I've been alive. That's terrifying. Um, just because it's game design and game development, all that is rather infantile, but or infantile in the sense of it's new in the grand scheme of
Definitely,
things.
very young
Um,
industry. Yeah,
Got to be careful with how I phrase that. I think sometimes. Um, but as someone that went to college for programming, and part of what I did like first year was a bunch of different generic annoying things, accounting being one of them. I can definitely understand what you mean by it being like all the worst parts of development, and you're just grinding you down. I personally don't have many um fond memories of it. To be honest, my fondest memory is uh, working on projects with a friend and watching him get distracted by the squirrels outside because of how absolutely boring accounting is. No offense to any accountants out there, but it takes a very specific kind of person, I think, to enjoy it. Um, but because of that, I have a question for you. Did did you playing with Excel lead to you wanting to do programming? Because you mentioned that that's sort of when the 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 cross path came, and I'm just curious if Excel is the reason that programming in Excel is the reason you went that direction or not.
no, yeah. Interestingly, like they're completely different stages of my life, and there was like no transfer in between. I don't even recall us using Excel in my accounting courses. We were doing just like really inane, like manual balance sheet filling out. And so, you'd get to the bottom, and if your numbers didn't line up, like that's it. You just had to start over again and then like comb through everything. Whereas, like in programming, if you make an error, it's at least going to tell you roughly like where that error can be found, at least like little syntax errors. No, I just like picked up a book, just like how to make a game in C++, and I just like was really interested in just like learning all of this from scratch. And I don't know, sometimes I kind of wish that I had just stumbled onto a game engine instead of like trying to make my own, because that was something that I kind of did on and off for 5 or 6 years, which is fantastic for working on like your development chops. but you don't spend much time working on like your game design skills when you're doing that, just because you're so into the nitty gritty of how the thing is technically going to work.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing I want to say, I'm very happy that Excel is not what led you to get into programming, only because that's that's just like a sick joke. I think that any like to that had to anyone to have to go through that being the road that led them there, only because that's having to do all of that in Excel. Well, it's powerful and great, terrifying to think that that is how someone got into it, right? Um,
Absolutely.
And yeah, I definitely understand what you're saying about, just opening up a C++ book and trying to make an engine. That's part of what kept me from when I first started trying to get into it. Uh, what kept me, that was like my barrier to entry, because I never was able to wrap my head around making the like level engine portion of like how to build out the levels, or what have you. So, I understand the you're focusing way more on the engine than anything else, and that can just be its own rabbit hole and its own nightmare.
And yeah, that's why like big companies have like specialists for this, right? Like if you really get into like a large company, you're not just like a programmer or an engineer. You will like specifically be like a render engineer or an AI engineer. Like it just gets so granular. And I have no problem with that. I think that's really cool for people that really want to just get in and specialize. But as an indie dev, I've always been kind of interested in a little bit of everything and trying to put an entire thing together just with like the pieces that I'm kind of able to wrangle.
Yeah, and like I said, definitely that makes perfect sense. And yeah, it's not always for everyone. Sometimes, like you said, you just sort of want to be able to do a little bit of everything, and some people really just want to do one thing, and that's, to them I say hats off, because as a rather logical and pedantic person, I've never been able to wrap my head around the logic necessary for a lot of those incredibly granular things. So for them, it's always just a matter of uh, you know respect on respect, if that makes sense.
Yeah, there are pros and cons to either method for sure. Like, you're never going to be the best in the world as a jack of all trades. And some of the people that I've met that like are really devoted to like graphics programming or AI programming, they are literally, in the top like 100 in their field, and they are just so specific. And a large part of their job is like research and like really pushing the boundaries of our art form. So I can see the beauty in it. It's just not particularly for me.
Yeah, exactly. So Dylan, based on your experience of how you got into making games, and where you've been with making games, is there any advice you would be able to give, based on, like I said, as from your experience, for those seeking to get into the industry?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just to make and release games. It's like relatively so easy these days compared to how it's been in decades past. Anybody this like today can just go and download a game maker or Unity or Unreal, and the amount of like tutorials and support that are out there for that. And I think if you really, especially if you want to well, actually, regardless of if you want to go indie or work in a big company, just creating games and then actually like putting them on something like itch.io or hosting them somewhere else, just to show that like, you're driven enough to go out and acquire the tools that you need to do something, and you can follow that all the way through to the end and then share that with people. And then also, once people are playing your games, like your skills as a designer will increase like 100 times faster than if you're just making things in a vacuum. Watching how people like engage with the designs that you've put together, hearing their feedback and incorporating it into your future projects. Yeah, just making games is the biggest advice that I could possibly give.
Awesome. Thank you for that advice, because I don't mean this in a negative way. That's something that is often shared, but it's always great advice, because I think, I've said this before, but I think the more that it gets said, the less people will pay attention to some, to some of the voices that say things, like, "Oh, just go bigger. Don't go big, or just don't even bother," right? Just make something, get it out there, and iterate on it. In your case, take the feedback and the advice, and what other people say, or watching how they interact is also great to hear, just because um, I think that's a step that might get missed, only because, like you said, you don't want to get stuck in that vacuum, because that vacuum just doesn't help you grow as a developer, as a designer, as a person, right?
Definitely. Yeah, and like being able to finish something is definitely a skill on its own. And it's one of the most challenging things. Like starting a new project is super fun. Like it's just like you've got this green field. There's no existing code that's going to get in your way. You don't have to be kind of thinking about the million different combinations that new content is going to put in that could potentially break things. So like starting things is like pretty dang easy, but the ability to actually like take something, get it across the finish line, and have the courage to share it, and put it out there, which can also be quite challenging, especially because you're always so close to your own work that you see all the flaws in it, right? So there's a lot of different aspects that go into finishing and shipping a project, and those are all great things to practice for sure.
Definitely. And as a developer, I can say as well, even when you're doing something and you are having to implement new things that are going to interact with everything else, and it breaks, because it's going to break. It's always going to break. The For me, at least, the amount of dopamine that is released when I do finally resolve that bug, that regardless of how challenging it um, is always a wonderful thing. So it's I know that some people, they get scared away when they start a new project and they hit a wall, and sometimes that wall is just takes a few hours to crunch on, but like getting past that point, one, you're gonna have your skills grow, because you're gonna, oh, in the future I saw this, I know how to deal with this. But you're also gonna feel so much better about yourself, because that dopamine hit is just glorious when you figure out a tough problem. I don't know if that's the same for you or other people, but definitely for me, that's 100% of the time the case.
Oh, I agree for sure. Yeah, and I think kind of as your skills increase, the bugs that tend to come up for you get more interesting. You kind of you learn some of the common pitfalls, and you tend to like avoid most of those. So the bugs that do come up tend to be like very specific for your project, and that's where I think things start to get really interesting, and solving those, and like maybe simplifying some of your older code that was less than ideal. Yeah, those are great feelings for sure.
Definitely. And thank you again for adding on to that, because yeah, I agree completely. um So I want to take it back a little bit, because you mentioned, always being a game enthusiast or what have you. Uh, what was your favorite game as a child, and why was that your favorite game?
The first one that kind of jumps to mind would be Star Ocean: The Second Story, which was like a Japanese RPG for the PlayStation One. And I think it was my favorite game just because the world that it had felt so vast, and it had some like really interesting systems in it that I like still think about pretty regularly. And for some reason, like I just haven't seen them well tapped, even to this day. So to clarify a bit, like it had this skill system where it had all of this bunch of different like crafting things that you could put together. So it had like a cooking skill, a smithing skill, things like that. And these skills were kind of made up of like smaller pieces. So to get better at cooking, you had to like improve like your recipe ability and your like knife skill ability, and putting up those abilities would also increase your combat skills. So if you put like, ability points into leveling up your knife ability, not only were you going to get better at cooking, you were also going to be stronger in combat. and I still like just don't see many games kind of have that kind of synergy between their systems. And I found that just really, really interesting at the time.
You know, I've only really played Star Ocean 3, I believe it is, End of Time. It was on the PlayStation 2. Um, if that makes it any easier. But hearing about the complexities, if you will, the mechanics of 2, that's really awesome because that you're right. Like as you were describing everything, it sounded a lot like the Atelier games or some of their offshoots like Manakima or some of the other Gust games like Air Tonelico, where they had different interactions for those systems for like for crafting, for smithing, for what have you to make items. Um, but none of them were really that complex. It was sort of like, a crafting simulator where you just had to craft um, different things and then you could mix in down and mix back up to kind of play the Skyrim system where you would eventually have, your smithing maxed out and have an iron dagger that's doing max damage because you mixed in, all the high level alchemy backwards and all that nonsense or what have you. But to hear about all of that in Star Ocean 2, that's really exciting just because that's, such an old game and they were doing things like that. And, I agree completely. I've never come across any games that seem to have what you're describing, that level of depth with that level of interaction. So that's, thank you for sharing that because I that I think I'm really intrigued by that just because that sounds like such an awesome system, and I'm kind of upset that I never stumbled across it over my many years of looking into JRPGs. So, thank you for sharing that, especially because that's, like I said, really intriguing to me.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, it's something that I really wish that we would see more in modern games. Even the most recent Star Ocean games have kind of walked that back, and so they don't have that same kind of interplay between the two systems, which is kind of upsetting. I think the best like kind of modern way to experience it is there's a Star Ocean remake for the Switch. So it's Star Ocean First Departure R, and it's a remake of the original game, which was first on Super Famicom. I don't think it ever made it to North America, but they remade that like in the Star Ocean 2 engine, and it has a very very similar skill system there. And I've been playing that a little bit recently and really enjoying it because it kind of captures a lot of the things that I liked about the original Star Ocean 2 in that case. But it's a whole new adventure and whole new world and characters and everything, which is always nice to get your hands on.
Yeah, thank you for that, and that's really awesome to hear. And I don't think it did get an official translation. I do know that I believe it was an unofficial translation. I mean, I believe it was Star Ocean that I tried. But I would definitely not recommend anyone go looking for those translations just because they were, how do you say, wildly inaccurate. And even as, a 12-year-old or whatever, I was able to figure that out. So if you do if anyone is going to go looking for the old unofficials instead of checking out the Switch remake, uh, stick to the official or stick to the more known translations, maybe not the weird uh, real background ones that might have existed 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's always a little hit or miss. You never really know what you're going to get.
I'd say this one was definitely more miss than hit. um So Dylan, we might have touched on this because you did kind of say a few things about it, but I don't know if this is going to hold true as a whole. But what is it that makes games enjoyable to you?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yeah, I think like I'm a big systems developer, or like not developer, but like big systems person. So I really like when like you get to put a bunch of pieces together to fit in nicely. One of my favorite like recent games, especially indie games, is Slay the Spire. which can really be seen in a lot of the Peglin design for sure. But just when you get like your build kind of solid towards the middle, the end of the run, and you're just kind of snowballing through everything, and it just makes up for like the past like 15 failures in a row once you're into like the higher ascensions. That kind of just like system interaction I like a lot. And then I do also really enjoy JRPGs just for being kind of a more chiller experience. Generally, a lot of focus on the world and kind of the stories that they're telling there. Yeah, I'm not too much of like an action gamer myself, I would say.
Yeah, very, fair enough on on all of that. And um yeah, I really like Slay the Spire. It's I've only played the demo for Peglin. I do want to say I did enjoy it. I thought it was a very interesting approach. Because at the time, like even before I saw the demo or before you released it or what have you, I was personally sitting and saying to myself regularly like, why has no one tried to do Peggle again? Because I thought Peggle was a great time wasting game because it was very simplistic. Just point the cursor and push the button and watch physics do physics stuff, right? And seeing what you guys are doing with Peglin, uh on mixing a roguelike approach and the Peggle approach, I think that's really fantastic. I think that's great. And hearing that you have other roguelikes as inspiration for how for things that you may have wanted to implement or what have you, I also think is great just because I like roguelikes. And I want to make sure I say this in case I don't get a chance to, but like the mix of how you're doing Peglin with the Peggle and the Rogue thing, I think that's just a fantastic idea, and I'm looking forward to it. And hopefully other people are just as on board for wanting um, something they probably never realized they wanted until they try it. If any of that makes sense at all.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we've definitely seen better response to Peglin than I think any other project I've ever worked on. It's been really, really exciting, having people play the demo, hearing people be really excited about it. And yeah, we do take a lot of inspiration from other roguelikes. I think it's always important to kind of see what other people are doing in similar spaces to you, seeing what you personally like and don't like about those games, and where you think they can be improved. And I think that's a big way that we kind of move forward as a medium. One of the things that I've always loved about the games industry is it's generally like really, really collaborative. And just, with how technical everything is, it's super easy to just kind of reach out to people and chat to them if you have any questions. There's another Peggle roguelike actually called Round Guard, and we've been at the same events as their developers sometimes, and or a few times now. And every time, we've kind of just uh, said hi to them and asked them some questions and chatted back and forth. And it's just been a really great experience. I find like I've never talked to a game developer that wasn't happy to like share how things went for them or what could have improved, or what they thought went really well. Yeah, generally just a bunch of like really great creative people, which is really, really cool to see.
And that's great to hear, especially that people that are making a very similar game to you, that you guys are able to discuss the things that you might be encountering or what have you. And I only say that because personally, if I was making a game that someone else was making a very similar game, I would be very nervous to talk to them, only because I'd be worried about it. But it's great to hear that you guys are don't seem to have any issues and you're talking, and it's you're able to share things, because you're right, like the collaborative nature of everything, and being able to to move forward, um, just in general moving forward with what you're doing and any struggles you're hitting. It's I imagine it would be great to also share with people that might be able to speak more to the specific issues that you might be having with with the Venn diagram overlapping a little more than normal, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I will fully admit that when I first saw their game, like they were releasing it, and I had been working on Peglin for like 4 months, and my heart definitely sank. I was like, oh, I thought we were at this like uncharted territory. I thought that we had this brilliant idea that had never been done before, and so seeing somebody get there, they had started the game like 3 years in advance, which I learned later. That was kind of an interesting experience for sure. But yeah, just the fact that they when they found out about our game, like it's not like they were threatened about somebody else moving into the space. Um, they really had like a really rising tides lifts all boats mentality, where it's like, hey, with these two games out there, now we can kind of start to create a genre and start like building more of into this kind of puzzle roguelike space. So yeah, it was definitely very, very lucky. Uh, just like that the other devs were so friendly and collaborative. Because had we started butting heads, then that might have been a much less pleasant experience. Um, so it's been an interesting one for sure.
Yeah, definitely, and I can understand that. It's I love that that was, or I love the analogy you used that the rising tide lifts all ships. Then that's fantastic because you know I think you're absolutely correct that the roguelike scene, um, yeah, it's 10 years is 10 years, but still, the roguelike scene has kind of been on an upward trajectory in the last 10 years, which is really great because for the longest time, a roguelike was going to be a roguelike, going to be a roguelike, in that it was going to be much closer to rogue than anything else. Not a lot of experimentation was being done, or at least from what I saw and what I tried, not a lot of experimentation was being done. And, as someone that really actually enjoys roguelikes now, with all the experimentation that's being done, what you said makes me feel optimistic that we're going to start seeing more puzzle based roguelikes, because that's a really interesting concept. And, hopefully games like yours and Roundguard, they they introduce more people to the idea of it and more developers get on board with it, and it's just something that ripples out, and as you said, the rising tide raises all the ships, right?
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that's something that we see like all the way across like indie games. Like other indie games aren't really our competitors because people that play indie games like love indie games. They're always looking for new games. The bigger competitors are anything from the big AAA games that kind of like monopolize all of the games media for like the 2 weeks that they first come out in, and then also just anything from like you know Netflix, any other like movie streaming services, things that are like pulling people away from looking into games or anything. So that's something that I always thought was quite interesting once I learned that, because when you're first looking into it, you kind of think like, okay, who are my biggest competitors going to be? They're going to be the games that are just like mine, the same size as mine, the same budget as mine, and that just doesn't really turn out to be true at all.
And yeah, like 100%. And that's when I first started, getting into indie games myself. I What I loved about them was, that they were smaller budgets, and because of that, the it appeared, at least, I shouldn't say all this stuff with like absolutes, but it appeared that because of the smaller budget and the smaller teams, or what have you, that the people behind it were incredibly passionate about the idea that they had. And that's not to say, people working on AAA games aren't passionate about what they're doing, because they most certainly are. But they have different mandates, and they have different restrictions and everything that come from above, and all of that fun stuff. But one of the things I loved and still love is that, you look at indie games and you have devs that are willing and wanting to try these new things. Like for example, with your game with Peglin, you know, it's I never in my dreams would have thought that I would see another Peggle like game, and I certainly didn't think I would see it intersecting with roguelikes. And that's the thing I love about indies is that, you know, developers like yourself, it's you're not competing with the other indie dev who's making a indie game, because what their goal, their aim is not going to be the same as yours in the sense of what you're doing, but they're going to have like the same kind of mentality of they have an idea and they really want to see that idea stick, and they really want to polish it and put it out, put it out there for people to try. And I just love it. And I love that the indie scene itself, 9 times out of 10, because I don't want to say an absolute, because there are some bad apples, just like there's always bad apples, but the indie scene itself always seems to be so supportive of other indie devs, other indie projects, and I just absolutely love it. And it's fantastic. And I'm sorry I don't know where I was going with that, but I kind of just ran with it at the chance to talk about how I love indie games, and how, I love that the risk that you guys are taking, and at the same time it being, like I said, a game I didn't realize I wanted until I saw it and was like, "Oh wow, this is awesome."
Oh yeah, no, I agree, and like wholeheartedly. Yeah, and you can tell why too. Like indie games, like I mean, unfortunately, like most of them fail. A lot of them are just like passion projects or labors of love. So there's kind of, these games don't need to make millions of dollars back. And that's kind of where you get more of that experimentation. Whereas when you have like, the big Halo that's being made by, probably 500 plus people over the course of like 5, 6 years, like that needs to make that money back, because that is a lot of like, that's a lot of people on the line, that's a lot of families on the line that need that paycheck. So it's definitely a different space, and you get different expectations out of it for sure, for better or for worse on either end.
Definitely. Now, there's another thing you said, and I it's just been nagging away at my head the whole time, and I kind of want to touch on it, only because I'm compelled to at this point. Um, but you had mentioned that one of the reasons you like JRPGs is that it's a more chill experience. Can you elaborate on that, please? And the only reason I say that, and this isn't meant to be smarmy or anything, but with the recent release of Shin Megami Tensei 5 being out there, um, I'm very curious what your definition of a chill experience is versus mine, because I immediately think of, a game like SMT5, and you know, for a series that has traditionally been about killing God, I think my understanding or definition of a chill game is very different than yours.
Yeah, that is very fair. Aesthetically, they are often not chill at all, zero chill. No, for me, it's really just like any game that is like turn based. It's not going to get like the heart rate going. Most of the time, when I play games, like I like to play games for like an hour and a half, like when I'm in bed. The Switch has been fantastic for that. I recently just polished off Octopath Traveler for the second time. Got to play it on Xbox to get the achievements. Um, yeah, I think there is a time and a place for like action games, but for me, that's really only as like a social activity. Otherwise, like if I have the energy to be like, playing this game that's kind of demanding of my full focus, my full attention, I'm going to be working on my own game instead. So for me, like games are a lower level activity, somewhere between working on my games and just like watching TV. There's just like that sweet middle ground for me.
And thank you for explaining that. And like I said, I know it kind of sounded smarmy. It wasn't meant to be perceived that way or put out that way. But thank you for explaining that, because that makes perfect sense. I understand the direction that you were going, and I agree completely in that regard. That like you said, a JRPG. well, there could be a lot of aesthetic things, story wise things that are not chill, but the ability, especially with the Switch, the ability to just sort of play it, you're not compelled to make your action choices immediately, and you can just play at your own leisure, put it down, check your phone or what have you. And just for the Switch especially, put it to sleep and put it on your bedside table or what have you. It's I agree completely. That is a very, JRPGs are very chill in that regard. And again, thank you for pointing me in the that direction for understanding.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, something that I'm trying to reconcile right now is getting back into Darkest Dungeon. And, that game especially is like very much not a chill experience, even though it's turn based. That is pretty much like, I think, as stressful as you can kind of drag the slider in that particular direction. But I have been having a lot of fun with it. Just my game characters, my party has not.
Yes, I understand completely with what you're meaning with Darkest Dungeon, because your characters have their own stress level. But like when I was playing it or trying to get into it, because I love the idea of it, but when I was trying to get into it, those stress levels of my characters, I think, reflected my own stress level way too much. Because even though, like you said, it was turn based and it wasn't like you had to be like, oh, God, do this, God, do this, God, do this, God, go quick. It was, you know, so much micromanaging of things that I was I was redlining along with my characters as they were having panic attacks and such.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I find there are a few games like that. The Civilization series I find is really bad for that too. Where there's 10 things that you want to be doing right now, and you can only choose one of them, and it's just like you really just feel stretched to your limits. Yeah, Octopath was like a much better nighttime game. That was like, you kind of start to nod off a bit while you're playing it. Darkest Dungeon, not so much. And my poor party is probably suffering for my sleepy lack in judgment.
I'm not one to judge, so I'm not going to comment on that, but I I definitely understand and can sympathize with you on that. So, Dylan, I am going to ask this, and you might have touched on it before or touched in that direction of it, so I'll explicitly ask it. But, do you have a comfort game that that's like your best comfort game? And by that I mean, is there a game that if you're having a bad day or even if you've played it for 50 times, if you're able to put it in, boot it up or what have you, and it take you back to that moment from the first time you played it or some of your best memories of when you played it. And by that I mean, like, for me, if I just think of like Mario Party 1 or 2 for the Nintendo 64, I'm immediately taken back to the moment of you know having being at sleepovers, and the glow of the TV, the smell of the room, all of that kind of stuff. Do you have a game like that? And if so, would you mind sharing it?
Yeah, certainly. I can't say there's any like one game that has like stuck with me for a long period of time. If I think of like comfort game right now, like it would have to be Slay the Spire for sure. Just kind of hopping in, I think I finally beat Ascension 10 the other day for the first time after trying for like 2 years in a row, and like it just doesn't bother me at all. Like there are some games that I play and I lose and I like, get a little bit grumpy. It's like, damn it, like I shouldn't have lost. It was this game. It's the worst. The developers are out to get me. For whatever reason, like I have none of that with Slay the Spire. It feels like this like fun toy that I'm just kind of like trying to bash things together to like make something happen. And if it happens, that's great. Like I get, big dopamine hit from that. Feels amazing. If it doesn't happen, then like, okay, we'll just try again later or whatever. Like maybe I learned something or I had a good run. And yeah, like it's just very, very comforting to me. Just like, the ability to play this game for 40 minutes to an hour and a half. And it's at the end of it, it's like, doesn't really matter if you made progress or not. But I do have to ask you, because you mentioned Mario Party 2, Have you had a chance to play like the new Mario Party Superstars? I think it's called.
Uh, I don't remember the name of it either. No, I have not. It's on my list of ones that I want to play or that I want to want to pick up and purchase or what have you. Uh, my significant other and myself, we had bought the last one on the Switch. I forget the name for that one. Forgive me. And it was okay. It wasn't it wasn't what I or what neither of us wanted. She had memories of some older Mario Party games, and I definitely have memories of older Mario Party games. And the new one that just come out, based on all the reviews I've seen, people talking about it and what have you, that one seems like it's exactly what I'm looking for. And by that I mean just watching the videos and watching people talk about the mini games that are in there, um, and the lack of certain mini games that are in there, thankfully to my palms. Um, it, just hearing that, it immediately brought me back to, being like 11 or 12 or whatever at those sleepovers and having all of us playing and the feeling of trying to subtly backstab your friend, multiple friends, and how it all worked out. So no, I haven't had a chance to get it yet or play it, but I'm I am very hopeful based on what I've seen everyone else saying and the footage I've seen of it.
I've only played like one round so far, one board, and yeah, it is incredibly nostalgic. It helped that I like was back home at my parents' house and like played a game like with me, my girlfriend, my mom, and my sister. And like me, my mom, and my sister used to play Mario Party 2, like way back when. But it was just it felt exactly the same. Just some of the things that have been missing from the series that you just don't really you don't really think of when you think back to them, but now that they're there, the kind of combination of all of them changes the feel of the game quite drastically. Things like the dueling gloves being back and things like Boo to be able to steal stars, like there's a lot more of that kind of like ability to directly interact with other players that I think some of the most recent games have been missing. And I don't know, maybe for better or for worse, there's a lot more like potential to be a jerk in the older games. Um, but I think part of that, contributed to how those games made us feel back in the day.
Everything, yes, 100%. I'm happy that you were able to experience, like, have that same feeling and experience when you were able to play again with your mother and your sister and now your girlfriend. That's great to hear. And I also completely, I agree with it. Sounds like you have a much better chance to be a jerk. And, it's Mario Party. I've always felt that that was kind of the purpose of it. And it was about doing it like sometimes subtly, sometimes fairly, sometimes unfairly. Like I have vivid memories of one friend's, sleepover, a birthday party or what have you. And for whatever reason, we all decided the one person was who we were going to steal everything from. And it started as a joke where like I stole the coins from him, my friend stole the coins from, the next person stole his star. And like by the end of that round, this person had no coins, no stars, because every chance we got, we we were jerks and we stole all of his stuff. And you know, it's the Mario Party experience. It lasts, it was like a 20 turn board, so it was like a 30-minute game or what have you. So, they might have not enjoyed themselves to the fullest for those 20, 30 minutes, but you know, we were on to the next game right away, and immediately we weren't picking on him anymore. Immediately it was now just everyone being somewhat chaotic and seeing how much damage could be done as a whole, as everyone kept accidentally trying to game the Bowser system where he just kept sending stars, coins, what have you, all over the place. And yeah, I'm happy to hear that it sounds like there's more opportunity to be a jerk because like I said, I firmly believe that was one of the core components of what made Mario Party fantastic.
Yeah, I think, there was a lot more just direct interaction between people. And I think that goes a long way, as long as you're playing with the right people, I guess. I am curious, have you ever played Dokkapon Journey or Dokkapon Kingdom? Because that's like JRPGs mashed with Mario Party, and then that kind of ability to be a jerk, for lack of a better term, dialed just right up to 12. Like it is just absurd.
So I personally had not had a chance to play that. I I've been aware of these games or the series, um, and I I always wanted to play them, but I just didn't have the people to play them with when they would have been out, and I just never had the chance to, and unfortunately, because if they were dialed up to 100 off of Mario Party, then that sounds like it would have been a much more chaotic experience, if I may put it that way.
It's an experience unlike anything else I've ever had in a game, because like beyond just these kind of indirect things where you can like send Boo to steal a star and whatnot, like you can actually just like chase other players down and fight them directly in like a JRPG style battle system, kind of mixed with rock paper scissors. And then when you beat them, like you can just like ruin their entire game. You can just take their weapon and throw it on the ground, and then they can't have it anymore. You can change their character name, like just all sorts of weird little things to just like kind of rub it in their face. And if somebody falls like far enough behind that they don't think that they're going to win, they can essentially sell their soul to the devil and just become like a super powerful monster that only like their only goal at that point is to then chase down the players that kind of put them in that position and destroy them. Like it is just chaos. It is just the most wild multiplayer experience I think I've ever seen. But yeah, unfortunately, kind of like you were saying, it was very difficult to like get a game together properly, because you either needed like four DSs and four copies of the game, or you needed like PS2 with the splitter. I think a version did come out on the Wii, which would support four controllers. Uh, but I've looked at it on like eBay, and it's like $300 these days. So clearly, they did not print very many copies, I guess.
Well, I did take a quick look to make sure when you were describing it to make sure I knew what game you were talking about, and just from the cover, yeah, immediately. Um, but it makes sense that there wouldn't be a lot of copies printed because it was or would have been around the time that Atlas was just barely committing to pre-orders. So yeah, that makes perfect sense to the reason that you would find it for such an expensive price. Which is unfortunate because what you described to me sounds absolutely psychotic in nature because it's like everything you're describing is just everyone has to be psychopaths, and I'm sorry, I love the idea of it, especially the point of falling behind, and now you literally just get to be an antagonist to whomever you choose, and you just get to do damage back to them after they have effectively changed your name and threw away your equipment as a huge insult.
Yeah, you become the blue shell essentially. But yeah, I'm pretty sure they didn't print more copies, because if they did, it would have like destabilized North America. Like it would have just torn families apart. It would have just been a nightmare.
Based on what you've said, I understand 100% what you're saying, and yeah, I could see it because Mario Party caused some damage. It caused some rifts, but those rifts were very short lived. These kind of rifts sound like they would be a little longer lasting than than a single board.
Oh yeah, yeah. These wounds do not heal.
But no, thank you very much for describing that game more because I like I said I had been aware of it when I was younger. I'd always wanted to try it, but I just couldn't get the people together because you're right. if it did support 4 players on the PlayStation 2, you needed that splitter, that multi tap, or whatever it was called. Um, and that was something that no one owned because there was only like 3 games that supported it, and at that point, why even bother? Um, yeah, yeah. So good to know. I'm gonna take a look at it because if it's something that I can try with 1 or 2 people, single player at least, it might be worth just experiencing what may or may not be the pure psychotic chaos that it is.
Yeah, I do remember that it supported that like DS download play, so you could technically play it with just one copy and 4 players as long as you had 4 DSs, which is a little easier to wrangle. But I remember it like not being the full board or something. So like think of Mario Party, but only being able to play like 5 to 10 turns, I guess, which is unfortunate because that would make things a lot easier.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Because yeah, like you said, it's much easier to wrangle a pile of DSs. I personally think I have 3. Counting the 3DSs and the new 3DS or the X or what have you. So yeah, that's a much easier thing to wrangle just by the very nature of you know one of, or if not the best selling handheld line, and its successors. Period. Right.
Definitely.
So now, Dylan, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. However, if there was anything else you want to discuss, another cool game or what you're doing or something you feel more people should be more aware of, the floor is yours. As well, please let everyone know where they can find more information about you, which I will also be including in the episode description. So, you don't have to worry too much about spelling it out because I'll make it clickable.
Sounds great. Yeah, I think the biggest thing would be if our conversation about Peglin was intriguing to anyone. We have a demo available on Steam right now. It's essentially like the alpha version of the game, but we'll have that up at least until we launch into early access sometime next year. Then the only other thing I can think of is that I'm helping to organize the first global game jam for 2022. So if you're interested in hosting a site applications are open, and then otherwise, Jammer registration will be opening soon. So Global Game Jam is fairly decentralized. We set it up so that like a site has to be like in a city for anyone to participate. But sites can be fully virtual again this year, so there's really not too much to organizing one. So if that's something that sounds interesting, especially to the developers in the audience, yeah, I highly recommend checking that out. It's a great experience.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And that does lead to another question if you have a few moments still.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you. So, I live in Ontario, and Toronto has a very healthy game development scene. A few hours to the east of me is Montreal. It has a very healthy game development scene. And you live in BC on the west coast, so I'm not overly familiar with the indie scene. I do believe there's a few studios or a handful of studios, AAA or big studios out there. But how is the smaller scene in your area?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before May of this year, I actually lived in Victoria on Vancouver Island there. And the game design scene in Victoria, Vancouver, and Nanaimo is all like incredibly healthy. There's a lot of just really cool studios doing really cool things. I've since moved to a small town called Penticton in the Okanagan. Essentially, like, this is kind of where my family is from, and then my girlfriend and I just got tired of like not experiencing seasons ever, especially during COVID. Like, Victoria is just super mild all of the time, and you're lucky to maybe get snow like once a year. The summers aren't super hot, so you're just kind of like, everything was really just starting to feel very samey. So we took a move to a smaller city. I'm fairly certain we're the only game developers in like this particular city, but there is a bit more happening in Kelowna, which is kind of the larger city, 40 minutes away from us, and that's where like Club Penguin was started and got really big, and then kind of split off into a bunch of different studios as people left and started their own thing. So a bit of a healthier indie scene there, and we'll see once COVID is over whether or not the isolation starts to get to us. Because right now it's essentially the same as living in town. Like there's not live meetups happening over there yet, so not too much different then. But other than like not having our local industry with us, it's paradise here. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, so that's great to hear that on the Victoria, Vancouver area that the indie scene is thriving, if you will. And I completely weirdly understand why you'd want to leave um such a a mono temperature, mono climate or whatever. Um because you're right. It's nice sometimes to experience everything. Hopefully the isolation doesn't hit too hard or hit you too hard. And as well, hopefully once everything starts to open up more, you'll be able to find that there is maybe small, but hopefully find a somewhat thriving community, just because it's always nice to be able to um, be with peers that you can have, real conversations with in person, and hands-on demos or what have you. So yeah, hopefully that works out for you, and um, hopefully, as you said, the isolation doesn't kick too hard.
Just have to see what happens. The nice thing about technology as it stands today is that you can just hop online and have conversations like this one, which has been fantastic.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you, because I'm glad you're enjoying yourself. And yeah, that's always nice as well, being able to easily talk with people, and communicating and all of that, regardless of distance and such. Um, but yeah, like I don't know about you, but I'm personally starting to. I don't know if isolation is the right word. Definitely isn't. But I'm personally starting to look forward to when this nonsense is over, and I am able to go back to things like game conventions, or go out without being scared, so to say. Because one of the things I absolutely love the most is being able to have like quick interactions with game developers, and be able to try something hands on, and in that moment be able to comment or ask about it. um which isn't to
Absolutely.
say which isn't to say I haven't been able to talk and say such nice things about Peglin to you, but in the moment I'm sure there would have been other questions that I would have, in be able to have and ask right away, that I personally wouldn't be able to multitask right now, and I wouldn't want to risk it.
That's been a big thing for us as well, just not having that like hands-on like playtesting and feedback. Like there's so much that you can learn, not even from what people say, but just from what their stumbling blocks might be, what kind of early moves they make while playing your game. And that's something that we just haven't been able to see with Peglin at all, which has been pretty crazy. YouTubers have really been like our savior on this one, just being able to see these videos that people put up, and they're so used to kind of speaking their thoughts out loud, that any little bit of confusion is made really evident, and that really shows us like what needs to be more clear, what isn't explained well enough, what doesn't like look like a button that should be a button. So that has been really really interesting, just as like a complete shift. Yeah, really, really looking forward to getting back to conventions for sure.
Definitely, and I am happy to hear that you are able to find alternatives. Might not be the right word, but alternatives in taking feedback, quote unquote, from YouTubers and such, watching them play to understand interactions from someone that doesn't set out to do a thing. And I say that from, a standpoint from someone that has worked in QA. And, when you do that stuff, when you're testing and you're on the inside, so to say, how everything should work. So you're like, well, no, of course I'm going to go and do this thing. But, you don't, you're not accounting for the person that's going to, for whatever reason, flip their keyboard upside down. So all the buttons are now pressed and then try and do the thing where the system then goes, oh, what am I supposed to do? You're pressing like five keys and then clicking on this, right? So it's always nice to be able to have some form of feedback in just how people interact with your own system, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like I think this comes from a I think it's from Jesse Shell. I just had to take a quick look at my shelf. Um, but he says that like the game isn't like the product that you put on Steam. The game exists between that program and the players. Like, the game is what happens like when the player plays the game, and the feelings that you make the player feel, the specific stories that come up from the player playing your game. And that is something that you just, you cannot test by yourself. Like, you are not the player. You already know everything that's in this system. And a big part of what we're doing with design and development is like conveying information accurately to people. So yeah, it's been an interesting shift for sure. But it's, yeah, having that demo available and having so many people play and share has been a lifesaver for sure. It's just been fantastic.
And I'm happy to hear that you're getting what sounds like positive response, because like I said, I absolutely love the idea of what Peglin is. Um, I I'm waiting for it to come out because I'm excited to be able to try a full version, be able to support you and the rest of the team that's working on it, and be able to experience it more, and hopefully other people are as well, and hopefully you continue to receive positive feedback that helps you guys polish uh polish things, as weird as it seems just to say it that way. But hopefully you continue to receive positive feedback, because you know i I look forward to it, and I look forward to what else is available and the interactions of everything, beyond what you put out there, and as you said, the alpha demo or what have you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're really excited to share the rest of the game with people. It's still fairly early in development. Like when we go to early access, that'll be like all of the areas will be there, but we still have a long road before we can like officially call the game done. So it'll be interesting to kind of see um, how people feel about playing an evolving game. We've already heard some gripes, even just with the demo. Anytime we need to nerf content that's just too strong, like player content. So that's been kind of interesting. But overall, like I think people have been really receptive to the direction that we're moving the game to, and it's been yeah, really interesting to just have that kind of open communication with players while we've been working on the game.
And like I said, that's fantastic, and I hope that you continue to go down that path, and I hope that more people find out about your game and are able to enjoy it, because like I said, I went into this not knowing that this is what I've wanted. And I hope other people that hear about it also realize that this is a game that they never realized they wanted, and that, it gets the recognition and, success that I personally feel that it deserves.
Thank you. Yeah, we're hoping for that too.
I will have my fingers crossed for you as well on that one, Dylan, for you and your team. Now, Dylan, as I said, I don't want to take up much more of your time. So if there was nothing else, I will let you get back to your evening.
Sounds good. Yeah, I should probably get back to work here.
Well, Dylan, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me and your busy schedule.
No worries. I'm sure the players will forgive me for an hour delay in some content. But no, I really appreciate you having me on. Yeah, it's been fantastic chatting with you, and yeah, I look forward to seeing some of the members of your community and starting to integrate that a little bit more. It's always nice, seeing fellow Canadian developers and content creators. So that's really cool.
Yeah, definitely. And I hope that more people find you, and I hope that I can at least play a small part in that.
Definitely. And of course, we'll share this with our community as well. They always like getting a peek behind the curtain whenever it's available.
Well, awesome, fantastic. So thanks again to our guest Dylan for making time to have this conversation with me, and thank you for joining us on the Red Tunic podcast. And a special thanks to Ronald Jenkins for the use of music from the title track from Roads Deep. And if you like this podcast and want to support it and help it grow, please subscribe or follow me on Twitter at Red Tunic Podcast to receive the latest episodes and news, and be sure to share it with those you think might also enjoy it. Thanks, and until next time.